And, I was looking to myself instead of looking to God. I was aware of the contradiction in my life, and I was like, I can fix this myself. And yeah, that became a self-focused thing. So simultaneously, I was spiritually burnt out and emotionally burnt out and physically wearing myself out in order to try to make my life worthwhile.
Welcome to this week's episode of the His Hill Podcast. My name is Kelly Doherty, and I'm your host. Today, I have with me one of our first-year students. He's about to finish up the year. From Australia, we have Gilbert Rayner. I met Gilbert the very first night in Bible school. We were at the same table, and we haven't had any extensive conversations throughout the year, so I'm looking forward to this conversation. I purposely haven't asked any questions before the interview because I like to get to know the people as I'm interviewing. So anyway, Gilbert is someone that staff had encouraged me to sit down and have a talk with, and he was actually on my list as well as one that I'd like to hear just what the Lord's doing in his life. There's so many of our students that I just would love to sit down and talk with, and there's really the Lord's blessed us with such large student bodies these last few years. It's hard to get to every one of them in an interview. But anyway, Gilbert, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Kelly.
Nice to have you. Appreciate you being here. Gilbert, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from?
So I'm from Australia, grew up in a farm in southern New South Wales, have a wonderful family, 3 siblings and my parents, and yeah, I'm number 3 out of 4, and I did college back in Australia previous to coming to His Hill, so that was 4 years, finishing up in 2023.
Okay, so how old are you?
25 actually.
Okay, yeah. 25. Has it been a good year for you?
It's been in every way an excellent year, and in many ways a very hard year as well.
Okay. What makes it excellent and what makes it hard?
Well, I mean, probably the easiest way to summarize that would be that the excellent parts is being seen more and more of just the nature of God and learning and fellowshipping with so many people. The hard bit has been realizing the sinfulness in my own life in so many ways, and also the difficulty of actually presenting your life as a sacrifice to God. It's not easy, it's impossible. Right.
Yeah, that's well said. Not easy, it's impossible. Yeah. And we spend a lifetime so often, sadly, admitting it's not easy, but not recognizing that it's impossible.
Right.
And so it's just a lifetime of frustration, which is not what the Lord has intended for us, both at creation and now for us in the new covenant and salvation. But maybe we'll get into that. Yep. Hopefully we will a little later. Tell us, what was it like for you growing up in Australia? Do you come from a Christian family?
I do, yeah. So being in church all my life, my family have been, well, my parents in particular have been great examples of just a Christian character for me to learn from, and taught from a young age like a balance between God's love and also His justice, like His judgment. And so I'm super thankful for the way that I was brought up in the faith. It's the biggest blessing it'd have to be in the top 3 blessings I've ever received.
Okay.
Certainly.
What was church life like?
Church life we went to a small country church, made up mainly of farmers, and there was some other young people that I got to hang out with, which was good, thankful for that. But it's a very small church compared to many of the churches that I've seen in America or even in the cities in Australia.
Okay.
So, yeah. But once again, faithful teaching, good fellowship. Yeah, really good.
Just out of curiosity, not that it's a big deal at all, but just simply curiosity, when you say small, how small is small?
On Sundays, we might have between 20 to 50 people in attendance. Yeah, it varied depending on the season, because farmers are seasonal workers.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yet with that few people, you still had younger people to fellowship with.
We did, yeah. A couple of other families that were similar age to us. So
that's neat.
It was really good, yeah.
How old were you when you became a believer?
It's hard to put an exact time on it.
Okay.
I made the decision to be baptised when I was about the age of 11.
Okay.
I remember having the clear conviction in my heart that it was the right thing to do, and discussing with my parents and the pastor. And yeah, so I think I would have in prayer given my life to Christ at some point before that. But I would say it'd be about, I made it official, I suppose, at the age of 11.
Okay. Yeah. And so being a believer at a young age, what was it like for you, those preteen years and your teenage years? And did you still have, you had the friends from church. What was it like for you? Was it a struggle to walk with the Lord? What was it like?
So we were homeschooled up until I was homeschooled up until grade 10.
Okay.
And so I suppose I didn't experience hardly any challenge to my faith at all before I went to school from grades 10 through 12. And I went into school with very strong convictions, and that was based on genuine faith on my part. I know that my heart towards God was towards Him, but it had not been challenged. And so when I went to school, I was quite vocal in defending my positions, and I'm thankful that I had the ability to witness to people, to my students, fellow students. And yet, as I went through grades 10 through 12, that's when the influence of the world really started seeping into my life. And without realising it, I suppose, my convictions and my heart inclination towards God sort of died down a bit, and sin started to take a more of a controlling, not a controlling, but had a stronger influence in my life. So, yeah.
That's interesting. You grew up in a strong Christian family. You had these convictions at a young age, and then earlier you said something about just what's been so hard for you is recognizing your sin. Coming to terms with it, I guess, and accepting that. Was it so when you went to school and these things started happening? Was it a shock to you? That this was happening to you, or were you accepting of it and going with it?
I always had the conviction that sin is still sin, and I knew, contrasting the influence of my family and different books that I'd continue to read and church, and that standard that I knew was the right one, and then also just being aware that my flesh was just so powerful and that it was so easy to just fall into sin. And it was, I lived for a long time with this conflict in my heart. I suppose it was a sense of guilt, that I continued to try to sanctify myself, shall we say.
Yeah.
And yet I was continually failing. And that was quite a burden that I carried for a long time.
Would it be accurate to say that you desired to please the Lord, but you knew you weren't, and you were trying to make that change? I was
desire to please the Lord.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
And so how long, so this was in high school, what we call high school. I don't know what you call it. But,
yeah, same, yeah.
And did this continue on through college, or was there any kind of change before that?
Yeah, so actually after I finished school, I had a gap year and I came over to Kansas and worked for 8 months doing contract harvesting work. And
contract what?
Contract harvesting.
Oh, harvesting. Okay, yeah. Harvesting, yeah.
That's the one. Yeah. And so that was that time in life was a very unique one. I was protected by God in so many ways, in that the company that I worked for turned out to be a lovely Christian family, and they really sort of protected me a little bit from the influence. And the other 25 guys on the harvesting crew were all non-Christian guys who were, living in sin, and living alongside guys like that at the age of 18 was a very strong. Once again, I saw the contradiction. It was so easy to go along with the attitudes that they had, and yet I knew in my heart what was the truth. And like I had that sense of guilt once again that I knew the right way to live, and yet I wasn't doing that. Yeah.
What kind of things were you doing to try to live right?
Well, I mean, I'd try to make a good routine of reading Bible, reading Christian books.
Yeah.
I remember reading Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis during the time, and that was such a strong contrast to the pagan culture that I was immersed in. And still maintaining contact with my family, going to church whenever we could. So that was good, but I mean, I knew experientially that it was not fulfilling, not good enough.
Yeah, Major Thomas once referenced something like, he said something like this, that that we could be, if we're not careful, we could find ourselves being very busy doing nothing.
Right.
And what a sobering thought, what a horrifying thought, actually. To just be so busy doing nothing.
Yeah.
Is
sure.
Is something to think about, really.
Yeah, I mean, there was no animating spirit behind what I was doing. And I'm just thinking about this now. Like, I mean, part of my history was that I just found it hard to pray, and it was a cultural faith that I'd grown up with, and it was all in my head, and yet the heart connection and like the actual living relationship with God was not there, or very only occasionally there for a large part of my faith walk.
So that was almost a year. I think you said 8 months.
Yeah, and then I went to college.
Then you went to college. Okay, well, what was college like?
It was good. Yeah, studied engineering, which was a challenge, but it was also something I was interested in. Probably the bigger highlight though was being quite involved with the Christian group on campus.
Okay,
and yeah, so they're excellent Christian group in Sydney there, and strong emphasis on Bible teaching and fellowship together, and I'm super, super thankful for that. Once again though, it was a time of growth in knowledge but not growth in relationship. And I was immersed in a different culture now, immersed in a Christian culture, because I spent most of my time with the Christian people in the places I was staying, and on campus with the Christian group. And yet it was even more confronting to me, because my knowledge was increasing, and yet I knew that my efforts to be holy enough were not sufficient and failing. Yeah, so again, that contradiction.
Yeah, I write a blog for our business, and just recently, we haven't posted it yet, but just recently wrote one kind of along those lines. I tell the story. It's interesting, you're talking about college, being there and learning, with these believers, you're studying, you're growing in your knowledge, but it can happen really anywhere, including a Bible school, where it just becomes all about knowledge. And it's with the intent of achieving, a life that pleases God. You want to be in obedience to Him. But I remember one year we had students upset with us, and this was years ago. I mean, probably over 20 years ago. We had a small group of students upset. I mean, they weren't angry with us, but they were in disagreement with us because we had just given them their third discipleship book. And for the listeners that aren't familiar with what I'm talking about, we divide our students into small groups, and they're assigned to a staff member, and that group meets with the staff member once a week for about 3 hours, and usually have a book to read and talk through, and it's just a discipleship time, more on a smaller, intimate basis, instead of being in a classroom with everybody. And so we had passed out the third for the spring term, and the students were frustrated, and they came to our assistant director and said, "Okay, look, Christ in you, Christ in you, Christ in you. We get it. Now, when are we going to move on to something else?" And long story short, a few years later, I was teaching at another Torchbearers center, and the student comes up to me, introduces herself to me, and tells me that she was the sister to one of those students who had made that statement to us. Mm-hmm. And I asked, well, how's he doing? And she responded with, well, her whole body, her demeanor just kind of sank, and she said, he's not doing well. And would you pray for him? I said, really? Well, what's going on? I can't believe I'm telling this whole story, because I was thinking I'm probably going to use it in an episode later in the podcast. But her response was, well, when I was getting ready to go to Bible school, my brother pulled me aside and said, whatever you do, don't do what I did. And I was thinking, well, what did he do? And he says, don't do what I did and waste your time. Right. And I thought that was really interesting, an interesting way of saying it, that, you know, he came here and he gained this knowledge and he learned these things and he knew. And so often we think what the Lord has for us, or the life that he has for us, is something and not someone. Right. Yeah. And we become all about some things. Yeah. You know, we all about, you know, learning the book of Genesis and you know, getting it all put together and understanding, and then, oh, the life of Christ. Okay, well, here's Galatians 2:20 and you know, Philippians 1:21, and you know, we can put all these things together and explain it. And okay, now I've got it. Now let's move on to something else. And you know, how sad it is to find that, you know, so often as believers, what we do is we take Christ and we move him down to the bottom shelf with all the other characteristics of Christ's life, and just make him one of the many truths of Christianity. And we can just be so busy with this, you know, doing these things. Like we talked about it in Hebrews when we have in that class, is that, you know, we can take good things from God, given to us by God. They are good because they're of God, and we put them in the place of Christ. Right. Instead of seeing that Christ is always better. Yeah. And so anyway, that was me taking a lot of your time, which our listeners are getting used to. I apologize for that, but I think it builds on what you're saying. Yeah. That you've been really busy up to this point. Yeah, certainly.
Certainly. And actually, predictably, that ended up with me burning out pretty badly.
Really?
At the end of second year in university. And yeah, there was a bunch of different influences to that. I mean, it was spiritual burnout. I was doing, you know, multiple hours of different class lectures and seminars and Bible studies and all these different things every week. And yet it was not something that was giving life. I mean, don't get me wrong, once again, I'm so thankful for that time, because I can see that it was God building a foundation of understanding that, I mean, it's information that can become animated if there's a relationship to make it animated. And so, yeah, so there was a couple of different things that happened, and basically, yeah, I started really, I made up for my lack of satisfaction or contentment, I suppose, with actually, this is the next part of the story, is kind of making the decision to go for military service. And I started in the Army Reserves, and was with the intent of going full time after university finished. Okay. And so that became an idol for me, working out, getting in condition for that, and trying to prove to myself that I could do something that was hard. And provide a level of self-respect in that way. And, you know, I was looking to myself instead of looking to God. I was aware of the contradiction in my life, and I was like, I can fix this myself. And, yeah, that became a self-focused thing. So simultaneously, I was spiritually burnt out and emotionally burnt out and physically wearing myself out in order to try to make my life worthwhile. Okay. Yeah, and that led to a pretty low point, particularly as COVID started happening and the lockdowns there. Yeah, that was...
Which was pretty rough in Australia.
It was. I mean, I was more fortunate than many.
Okay.
the timing was okay for me, and Sydney wasn't as bad as Melbourne.
Oh, really?
With the lockdowns. But yeah, no, it was just another thing that added pressure to me, and kind of I recognise it now as God using things that were happening that were hard in my life to break through the armour that I'd built up around my own heart. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so this is after your second year in college?
Yeah, this is third year and start of fourth year of college.
Okay, so as you're working through and finishing up college, what happened? What did the Lord do in your heart?
Well, as I said, like he was using those difficult things to really break through to my heart. And so what ended up happening is I was able to move out of Sydney just before the next lockdown came and finish off my studies by distance from home.
Okay.
And I was able to go to a church back in this local large town at home out in the country that the teaching and the particularly from the head pastor there just really, really spoke to my heart. It was rigorous biblical teaching, and yet it wasn't just in my head, it was in my heart. And over the course of probably a couple of months in particular there, I just can look back and see that God was really just getting through to my heart and inviting me into that relationship with him. I started to pray consistently. Yeah, as I said, which is something I hadn't done consistently before.
What have you found that's profitable in prayer? Because I know that's something that throughout my life that I've had to think through and walk with the Lord with, and it's really only, I would say, in the last 9-10 years that prayer has become something very precious to me. So I'm just curious, as you were saying, it was difficult for you to pray, and now you start to find the importance in it. What was it that was so important? What was it or what is it now that the Lord is even working in your heart with prayer?
I think there's a couple of different things. Obviously the initial thought would be that in any relationship, if you're not talking, it's not much of a relationship. And so, if I'm just reading Bible and I'm not actually opening my heart before God in a genuine way. And that's part of the thing for me. I don't want to just pray mechanical prayers. I want to pray with my heart open before God. And so doing that is, I believe it's essential to having a living relationship with God. And then the other part of it is just laying my burdens, bringing them before God. Yeah. And he promises to, carry our burdens, with us, or I forget the exact verse, but I think you know what I mean. Yeah. And, I don't need to carry everything that is weighing me down. Jesus is my helper in that. And probably the third thing that I really found essential is prayer is also a chance for confession. And everyone's got sin in their lives. The Spirit works in each of our lives continually to convict us of sin that we know about, or even that we don't know about. And my realization at the time was that I needed to be walking before God with a clear conscience. And, even if I sin, the opportunity is there. And, 1 John 1:9, confess your sins before him, and he's faithful and just to forgive us from sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. That really contributed to me being able to no longer have that burden of guilt upon me continually. I had the realization that it is possible to walk before God with a clear conscience, and that actually doing that is critical for the growth in the relationship.
Right. Yeah, I appreciate that. I think you're referring to when Jesus says, "Come unto me, all of you who are weary and heavy laden,
Yes.
Who are burdened, and I will give you rest."
Yes.
And it's the so often I think we understand it the opposite. Come unto me, all of you who have your life together. Because that's how we live. We feel like we have to have our life all put together and then go to him.
Yeah.
But he's inviting the heavy-hearted, those who are burdened, and to take on what is of him. It's an incredible. It's just amazing how we can take things and just twist it.
Yeah.
To the opposite. And I agree with you. There's just that time. There's these things that we can. It's an incredible time for us to come in line with him. Mm-hmm. And to admit, it's not a time to talk him into something, but a time to agree with him.
Yes.
And that's good for us, and there, you're right. Our conscience, it is possible. When we were in the book of Hebrews, we saw that, where that the whole problem with the old is me, right. And I can never live with a clean conscience. But, it clearly says though, but the new, he has cleansed our conscience. It doesn't mean that we're not going to struggle with sin, that we're not going to fail, but we are free and are clean and can live that way, but with him,
Yeah.
Not necessarily, trying to figure out how to do it for him, but be with him and let him do what he's doing. It's what only he can do. That's neat. Okay. So that's exciting. So, and I think it's really neat too, that, I love the international aspect of the Torchbearer ministry, because it often reminds me, it gives me a glimpse of how big God is. So, here's Gilbert on the other side of the world, and, you're struggling, you're pursuing, you're desiring, the Lord, mm-hmm. and you're failing miserably, but the Lord is faithful to pursue.
Yes.
And to work in your heart, just like he does here, like he does in Africa, and and does in Canada and Europe, and all over the world. Yeah. He is faithful to work the same things.
Yes.
And to bring you to this understanding of your need, walk with me, be with me. So did you graduate from college?
Yeah, I did. Yep.
Okay, so you're an engineer.
I am.
Okay, what kind?
Mechatronics. So
wow.
Basically robotics.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, that actually sounds fun.
It kind of is, actually. Yeah, I really enjoy it.
I bet.
Not that I've done much of it, to be honest, but anyway.
So with that, you said that you've already taken a gap year.
Yep.
After high school, before college, and often that's when students come to us, is for that gap year.
Yep.
So what did the Lord do in your life after you've had a gap year, after you've gone to college? You're 25. That's not too old, certainly, for Bible school. But the majority of our students are from 17 to 21, I would say.
Yeah.
When we have had retired couples, come and, but what was it? What did the Lord do in your heart to bring you to a point where you were going to take a year out and study?
For many years, I have had the desire to do further study in Bible study, Bible mm-hmm. school. I didn't know when I would get the chance again to do that. And there was, I still don't know all the different factors that played into my decision to apply when I did. I got waitlisted the first time around, so I would have liked to come a year earlier than I did.
Okay.
But yeah, I can see God's timing in it all. Certainly, I think the benefit of coming at a slightly older age for me has been just a awareness that this is a unique opportunity and it's something to be made the most of. And just to really value the time that I have here and the chances to learn. To be honest, I still don't know exactly why God has brought me here. That's part of what I'm thinking about at this time. Like, what would God have me do in the future, whether it be further study or heading back and doing the farming or engineering type thing. Mm-hmm. So I don't know the exact reasons on the other side of this, why God has me here, but I can so clearly see the transformation and the work that he has done in me and in my faith. It would not have occurred. Well, I think it would have occurred eventually. I mean, God's faithful, right?
Right.
But I think it's just the opportunity to have this in such a compressed, condensed amount of time.
Yeah. It's a unique opportunity.
Certainly, yeah.
Yeah. So what specifically, in sitting in classes and being, constantly in fellowship, and what's some of the highlights? What are the things that you can look at and say, well, the Lord has done this. The Lord's doing this.
I could say a lot of different things. Probably one of the biggest things that I can recognise that has been happening over the course of the 8 months that I've been here has a recognition of who God is and who Jesus is. I tend to be a very self-focused kind of guy who's just focused on what I'm working towards achieving, and so things have to fall in line with the mission. That can be the tendency that I go with. However, I've been reading through the book of Ezekiel, and there's this one phrase that keeps coming up. God is doing all these judgments and to bring his people back to him. And there's one reason that keeps coming up, that they will know that I'm the Lord. And that's for both his people and it's for the nations surrounding. And I can just clearly see that, seeing so much of who God is through through the study that we do, through the fellowship, even through the work that he's done in my life, that I can see. It's just that I actually have a right appraisal of who God is. For me right now, I don't think that there's a more important thing than to recognise that God deserves to be in his place and that he's far above and I'm a human. And I'm still thinking through all of this as we speak. I finished Ezekiel today, actually.
Did you?
Which was pretty cool. And then from that, a recognition of who God is, and then a recognition of who I am and what I am not, and in that sense that I am, there's nothing particularly remarkable about me. That God would choose to have a relationship with me and choose to use me in some way, I'm pretty excited about. I don't know what that'll be, but just a right recognition of who God is and who I am and how much I need him.
Yeah, there was somebody, I can't remember who said this, but it's a quote, you don't know what you're going to do. The only thing you know is that God knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
And that's all we need to know.
Right.
That's, what an incredible comfort. I agree, you're talking about Ezekiel, and I've been spending some time in the prophets, and it's been helpful for me, as the Lord has pointed out, that what you're seeing in Ezekiel, you see in all of them, all these prophets, where God is presenting himself for who he is to a people who don't see him. And he's so faithful to show himself, and he's so faithful to do what must be done for them to see who he is.
Certainly.
And it's we're gonna study Daniel in a few weeks together, and it starts off with what God has done, and what he's done is he's given his people into a godless nation, and it's because Israel has come to the point where they don't see God for who he is, but because he's in relationship with them, he's going to be faithful. And sometimes that means it's going to be tough.
Right. Yeah, I remember Ron Lowry speaking on the Book of John a couple of months ago, and I mean I forget the exact chapter that he was teaching from that particular evening. I mean it was the pruning.
Yeah.
John 15, right?
Okay, yeah.
And I'll probably get his words wrong, but the idea was that God is the master gardener or the farmer, and he knows exactly how to prune the branches in order that they will bear more fruit. And pruning is not a fun process, but it is necessary. And that really impacted me at the time. And yeah, I can clearly see different pruning that God has been doing in my life, even over the last, that's part of the hard things about being at Bible college. I feel like God uses the opportunity to do a bit of extra hard pruning. So I mean, I'm thankful for that.
Yeah, you mentioned it earlier too, that there's been some really hard things you've had to go through, but you see that the Lord was using those things.
Yeah.
And I know that's been true in my life. I think every believer that's walking with the Lord can give testimony to that. There's been things in my life where I've told people, and one big thing that I just recently went through in the last few years, and these are things that I hope I never have to go through again, but I'm so thankful for those times.
Yeah.
Because they were with the Lord and he was showing himself and he was working in my heart things that amplified who he was in the midst of what I was going through. And, so I'm thankful for his faithfulness, that he's willing to take us into those places.
Yeah.
But out of love, for his glory, and that's one of the things I've learned in him too, that I'm not going through these things for my glory. Right. This is not about me, it's about him. Yeah. But being about him is where I find true contentment.
Exactly.
So as he has his way in me, the way I was created, as he has his way in me, I find that I actually start to live.
Right.
So that's, those are great reminders. So the end of the year is coming up. We're down to 6 weeks maybe?
I don't know. I don't want to know.
And so as we move toward this, do you have any immediate plans? Do you know what's next?
Yeah, actually, this is part of the learning to walk by faith thing, which is a fairly new thing for me. But God has been faithful to provide a next step and to open a door to go to the next step, and that's to go spend a bit of time with a farming family from the northern US. And I'm super thankful for that.
Okay.
I don't know why God seems to have clearly opened this door, but I mean, and so that's the other thing I've learned is that God might be pointing me in a particular direction, and I might expect a particular result, but probably my expectation is wrong. There's still a good reason that God's pointing me in the direction.
Yeah.
But my job is to just go that direction with faith and serve as I go. Yeah. And trust God with what happens.
I like that. Yeah, that's encouraging. If he's sovereign, then he's got it.
Right.
So it's
easy to say that.
Yeah. So it's better for us to be with him.
Certainly.
Yeah. Then that's good. I'm curious. I meant to ask this earlier, but still kind of coming toward the end, I'll go ahead and ask it anyway. I always like to hear from internationals about the church in their country, and just to get your take on it. How would you explain what's the church like in Australia?
So I've had two different experiences of Australian church. One is the small country church that I grew up in, and then the other is in the big cities. In the cities, the churches are doing really well. There's plenty of attendance, and depending where you are and which particular denomination that you attend, the teaching is very, very good. Rigorous Bible teaching. I mean, there's no denomination that's going to necessarily align exactly with what you might feel to be the ideal one, but certainly in the cities, in my experience during university, I was blessed to be part of some very on fire churches, Reformed good teaching. And then back in the country, there's a lot of small rural towns that are limited with population and also limited with churches, and a lot of them are small and older. And I suppose that's a similar experience. Maybe that's similar to rural parts of America as well. But I mean, there's definitely less of a Christian culture in Australia.
Okay,
I can see that pretty clearly.
Do you see the church as a whole showing a desire to walk with the Lord and to deal truthfully with Him, or do you see it as being more of a, trying to just kind of get along with the world?
In Sydney, there's a very strong stand on biblical truth in the churches there. Okay, which is excellent. There is a lot of pressure, though, particularly in other cities, to go along with progressive type thinking, progressive theology. Okay. So it really varies from where you are. Okay. I mean, there's certainly there's some very, very good churches in those cities that in general are more liberal and less of a focus on biblical truth.
Well, it sounds a lot like what's going on in North America.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's. I think it's good for us to know, so we understand better how to pray for our brothers and sisters in other parts of the world and what's going on. And I really think we should be praying, that the Lord would grant us a spiritual awakening, at least one more, Lord, where we be taken captive with Christ as a church, and that many people come to know Jesus.
Yeah, one of the encouraging things is, so after coming back home from the city, in the local large town that I was referred to earlier, the church that I started going to there had a very small young adult group, and there was like maybe 5 or 10 young adults at the evening service that they were trying to get off the ground and running. And there was a group of people that got together and prayed for quite a period of time, that very intentionally that God would bring young people to fellowship together and to grow together. And God really delivered on that. The group went from 5 to like 40 or 50 within a period of a couple of years. And at the moment it's still such a place of fellowship and encouragement. It's wonderful. So
that's encouraging. And it goes back to prayer,
exactly.
Going to the Lord, agreeing with Him, and acknowledging that, we need Him for Him.
Right.
We need you, Jesus, for you.
Yep.
and have your way in us. And so that's neat. Well, Gilbert, thanks for giving us the time. I appreciate it.
Very welcome. Thanks for talking. It's been good.
Thank you for tuning in to the His Hill podcast. You've been listening to our host, Kelly Doherty, along with one of our first-year students from Down Under, Gilbert Rayner. We hope you enjoyed hearing from Gil this week, and that his testimony of God's goodness, provision, and patience in his life served as an encouragement to you and your own walk of faith. We have 5 weeks left in the Bible school year, and we all are wondering where on earth the time has gone. The term will conclude on May 23rd, and summer staff training will begin just a few days later on May 27th. As these future events spill over into reality, we ask for prayer that we all would be prepared for what lies ahead, and that our hearts would be filled with gratitude more than any other thought or feeling. The Lord has done good things this year on the hilltop, and I know I speak for all of us when I say we shall be forever grateful for what He has accomplished in us these last 8 months. Once again, thanks for listening to the His Hill podcast today, featuring Kelly Doherty and Gilbert Rayner. Thanks so much for tuning in with us. Remember to keep your eyes fixed on Christ. The Lord will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. Take heart and let Him be Lord of your life. He knows the way. I'm Lizzie, and we'll see you next week.